Again, I know that everybody's really busy right now. We've all got things coming up. Just real fast in the chat, I want to follow up with what Rob said. I did put a link to the 2021 annual conference for OMLA. So that is October 28th and 29th. And then I also put a link in the in there about OASSA membership, because we are always thankful for our partnership with the OASSA, and appreciate Heather coming. Heather is in her second year, right, Heather? Second year? Yeah, starting her second year as the Associate Executive Director of the OASSA. I put her contact information, her email address in the chat as well, if you need to get a hold of her. But we're really blessed to have her here. If you have not had a membership to the OASSA or have not had the chance to use them, I'm telling you that a membership with them and their guidance is invaluable to you as an administrator. But we really appreciate the partnership that we've had with them. They do these legal updates for us every year. And as Rob said, we're going to try to do more virtual ones to kind of save people's time and allow people to continue to do their work and do the different things that they need to do to be successful supporting our teachers and other educators in our buildings. But they also, we need some protection as well, so at times. So the OASSA is great to kind of kick back some ideas to and make sure that you are covered. Heather can be found on Twitter at Mrs._H Powell. So I will put that in the chat. And also OASSA is found on Twitter at Ohio Principals. So Heather, people are here to hear you talk, not hear me talk. So I'll turn it over to you and you can take it away. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate all of you taking time on your really busy schedules. Before some of you came on, we were talking about how this is a very busy time of year and we have a lot of moving parts. And so I appreciate you taking time or watching this in the recording. We hope that we're able to provide some invaluable information as you go into the school year. Certainly things are definitely different than they've ever been. And so we appreciate two things. Number one, educators as a whole. This is a really difficult time to be an educator and you're definitely taking some hits, but also the partnership that exists between OASSA and OMLA. So thank you for allowing us to come today. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you guys. You will get a copy of this as well if you've registered, but if you have any questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to kind of go through any of those that you might need. So let me do this real quick. So as Andy said, I am Heather Powell, I'm the Associate Executive Director. I've been there since July of 2020. I decided to move my family during the pandemic, and it's been a great move. I'm really enjoying Columbus and the opportunity to work with OASSA in a different capacity. And so speaking of OASSA, we want to make sure that we do our annual opportunity to let you know a little bit about what we do. Our membership is important. It's so important if you are an administrator to belong to your professional association. 70% of the districts in the state of Ohio pay for your membership. And so we would just encourage you to reach out. A lot of you are not putting any money out of pocket, or your school district will be taking care of that for you. But I will say that your $295 membership, even if you do have to pay for it out of your pocket, is a whole lot cheaper than an hour with a labor lawyer. We have spent a lot of time this past summer, surprisingly so, I'll talk about it in a little bit, helping members avoid some very difficult conversations with their boards of education, because we were able to give them some advice. And so that $295 is definitely worth your time and money. I would encourage you also to look at your renewal dates. If you are currently a member, this is the time of year where a lot of folks are up for renewal. But we do know that without your renewal, or without you being a current member, we are unable to offer you that advice, and you would be required to pay for your own attorney outside of your out of your own pocket. So we want to make sure that you are current and that you are a member here with us. Anyone who is a middle level administrator, high school, secondary level administrator, all the way up through, but not including the superintendent, are eligible to be members of OASSA. And so if you know somebody who is not currently a member in your district, please reach out to Andy. He will be happy to give you the information on how to become a member. Like I said, membership is key. Typically, in years past, it has been March that's been crazy. A lot of administrators move around during that time, are being told that they needed to get a new place of employment, but we have found that that has been extending all the way through July this past year. It's been 2 of the busiest years for administrators, and they are finding themselves in trouble contractually. Make sure if you are an administrator that you are aware of your 3319.02 rights. That is what we are here to remind you of. Administrative contract law requires that you as an administrator are evaluated in your at the end of your contract, but make sure that you don't predate your signature. If you are an administrator, that is like rule number 1. But during the year that your contract expires, you're to receive at least 2 evaluations, one at least 60 days prior to board action. And then the final evaluation shall indicate the superintendent's recommendation. You are to receive a written copy at least 5 days prior to board action, and you have the right to meet with your board with representation. And so if you find yourself in this situation, I would love for you to pick up that phone and call Tim or I, and we will be there to support you and walk you through that entire process and to make sure that your rights are protected. Some of you are not administrators, and so you're not really interested in hearing that part of the conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the legal update, some things that you may be interested in knowing that may affect your classroom or just your school district as a whole. So House Bill 404 contains some provisions about evaluations for the 2021 school year. And so House Bill 197 and 164 took those same provisions and allowed for us to kind of sort of move forward. So that included no value added or student growth measures, and the board had the option to forego their evaluations altogether. But just know that there's no relief for districts who choose to suspend evaluations. They're still subject to those contractual obligations, implications, especially related to those renewal and non-renewal. So if that was your situation, know that your Board of Education still needed to evaluate you in order to be able to sort of move forward on a non-renewal. And unfortunately, for a lot of our administrators, they are finding out that they're expendable, because in this difficult time, making difficult decisions about whether or not we're going to have prom, whether or not we're going to have that school dance, whether or not we're going to be able to gather for 6th grade orientation, those administrators are definitely expendable. So one thing that might have been of interest to you in your classroom or into your school district was some of what we thought was expired, or you may have thought was expired legislation. House Bill 164 was all about the Corona-19 relief bill. And in the spring, it was used for education related type things. And so if you were not aware, part of that allowed for public schools students to pray, to attend religious gatherings, and include their faith-based beliefs in their schoolwork. So Mike DeWine signed this bill back in June of 2020. It's also known as the Ohio Student Civil Religious Liberties Act of 2019. Again, it was sort of wrapped up in this coronavirus information, but be aware in your classrooms, public school students are allowed to pray, allowed to attend religious gatherings, and to include faith-based beliefs into their schoolwork. So let's talk about some of the new legislation. That's the stuff that's carrying over from last year. Let's talk about what has happened. We had a new biennial budget bill that came through. And if you have been around for any length of time, you will know that the budget bill often includes a whole lot of other stuff that has nothing to do with budget. However, one of the big things that did take place in this is the new Fair School Funding Plan, or FSFP, for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. And there's a lot of money floating around. And if this does not pertain to you on an individual level, I'll just kind of give you the highlights to it. But as I said at the outset, you'll have copies of these slides, and I'll be happy to share any or answer any questions that you might have after the fact through an email or something else. But just know that this is how we're going to change school funding for future years. The only thing that you necessarily need to know is that this is for 2 years, and in this 2 years, they're going to continue to look at how to make school funding more equitable. The biggest thing that I from kind of going back to my principal days that I sort of stood out to me and what I wanted to make sure you saw the acronym of was this DPIA. Disadvantaged Pupil Impact Aid. This was what was formerly called your economically disadvantaged pupil funding. So you saw those ED distinctions in the past, whether it was for testing, whether it was for just how your funding kind of came through. If you're used to seeing economically disadvantaged, the language has changed and it's now Disadvantaged Pupil Impact. So our DPIA. So just kind of note that if you do end up looking at budgets and things of that nature. But what this DPIA allows for are a number of things. You can use your funds to extend your school day, or you can add reading interventions, a list, long list. I'm not going to read this to you. Like I said, this is going to be available to you. But there are a lot of different things that you could be using those formerly economically disadvantaged dollars for. This was grouped with the student wellness and success funds and that fair school funding plan. They kind of got grouped all together and are a part of House Bill 110. This new funding formula did make some changes. And if you had been involved in the past in understanding how funding works, in the past, what took place was that the monies, the foundation funding kind of came to school districts, and then money flowed through back out to community schools, STEM schools, vouchers, open enrollment students, and then you had to kind of work with other districts to get the monies in the right place. Well, no longer are your funds going to be deducted from your school district state payments. Instead, they're all going to be funded individually. That may not pertain to you in any capacity, but if you were involved in that, it's a wonderful thing because it makes it a lot cleaner for our treasurers and bookkeepers. There's some changes with how the base costs will be calculated, and that's again an attempt to get us to a closer, more fair and equitable funding platform. And so there's lots of literature that's out there around it. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that because I'm not confident that that's my audience that I'm sharing with, but if you want more information about that, it can be made available to you. Some things that you may want to know is just that the second bullet there, the DPIA funding will utilize previous funding formulas for funding education for economically disadvantaged pupils, but the base per pupil amount has increased. And so that's a good thing. There's no local share requirement for your district as well. And so that is kind of a nice piece to that. The fair school funding increased amount for each district is calculated by comparing the total funding that you got in 2020 to the total produced by the new plan. And so it's a phase-in percentage that you'll see. Your district office is already fully aware of this, and they have, I'm sure, been making adjustments accordingly. So you need to know that there are definitely going to be some people that are asking for where's my money and what is it all about. I will say that there are some things that some guarantees that went out there that says that even though your funding formula will have changed, there's some guarantees that says that you will not receive less money than you did in 2020. The transportation is a big factor for your central office folks. They're wanting to make sure that they have the appropriate amount of funding for all of your students. The interesting part for me was this last part on there. It increases the minimum of the payment in lieu of transportation to 50% of the statewide average cost of pupil transportation for the previous school year. And so that's a factor when you sit in IEP meetings and or just in meetings that ask about transportation, and they want to know if the families can transport in lieu of providing transportation by the district, because sometimes it's more cost effective to give the families an amount, that PIL amount. The way that is being funded is going to look a little bit different. So just be aware of that as you're having conversations. Be sure that you're checking in if you are responsible for making those decisions in your district, to have conversations with your treasurer, superintendent, special education director to understand where you guys will be in that process. I don't believe there's any ESC folks on here, but if there are, it's going to change how those are affected. And same thing with the JVSD, your joint vocational school districts will be funded a little bit differently as well. There might be some folks that are in K-8 buildings here. Just know that the window for administering the kindergarten readiness assessment, the KRA, and the kindergarten reading skills assessment for the 3rd grade reading guarantee changes. The window changed, so make sure you're looking at those dates. And know that as a district, you may be called on to ask or answer some questions about your specific building as they plan to have a DPIA plan in place, because it will be required. I'm going to skip that last one, but if anybody has any questions about transportation grants, we certainly could talk about those later. And unfortunately, biennial budget bill policy stuff kind of just keeps going. Those are chock full of information. But what I wanted to make sure that if anybody needs this information, that you are aware. The interesting thing for me was bullet number 2. This bill adds a definition to the unused school facility in the law governing a school district's involuntary disposal of facilities, requiring them to offer them to community schools and others. So if you've got some extra unused facilities in your building, maybe an old building that you weren't using, there's some rules that you may have that changed it a little bit about your ability to sell that property off without offering it to a community school first. So if that's your situation, I'm sure you'll be in contact with folks with the Facilities Commission to kind of move through that process. If you are a middle school and you are working with Algebra 1, geometry, all those good things, you may be involved in some of the competency score conversations. What House Bill 110 also offered was the ability to still use a remediation-free score on the ACT or SAT to replace that Math Algebra 1 grade or score for their competency. But as somebody who sat in your chairs as a building administrator and then sat on the state level decision-making stakeholder group for multiple years as they processed through the graduation requirements, I will say I spent a lot of time building a lot of things that are no longer in existence. So if you're working in the middle school and you're trying to prepare your families and your kiddos for what graduation is going to look like, as a most recent high school principal, I will tell you, just wait, do your best with the information that you have, and certainly things will continue to change and evolve, because those graduation requirements that we put in place and said these will never change, those graduation requirements have changed every single year. So do with that what you will. Again, there's some pieces here about transfer students and graduation requirements and what happens when you have a student on an IEP and how they can earn their high school diploma. It's spelled out pretty well here for you, but there's some opportunities where there didn't exist before to exempt students from that requirement if they have an IEP that specifically exempts them from that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I know that I don't have a lot of high school folks on, but if you have a colleague in your district that might be interested in this information, feel free to share it on ahead with them. And then this is also related to diploma seals. Just know that the appropriation portions of the bill became effective on June 30th, but all these policy things aren't effective until September 30th. So we'll skip ahead and talk a little bit about report card, because House Bill 82 is the report card reform. And that represents a compromise between the House and the Senate. OASSA members were given an opportunity to weigh in. OAESA members as well came to the table with superintendents and some legislators to have some conversation around what report card reform might look like. And I think that they took a lot of our suggestions. While they didn't give us everything that we were looking for, there was a decent compromise, and I appreciate when that does happen. But the report card changes did eliminate the A through F, but unfortunately we all pushed for a 6-star to get away from the idea that it's A through F, and we ended up with a 5-star, which you all know as educators is really the same thing, but we will move on. But it does give us a little bit of leeway in verbiage and how we can share this with our communities on report card changes. If you did have a high school staff member or administrator in your district who was super frustrated by that prepared for success component, a wonderful thing that came out of it is the fact that we are no longer grading that component. It will still be reported, which I appreciate, because I think that it's important to know where your school district lies. But as a high school principal who could not ever move past a certain threshold because I didn't offer a lot of the courses that would allow for additional points, I'm very happy to see the prepared for success component not being graded, just a reporting category. But those same things will still exist there. One thing that you guys might want to note is achievement. The achievement score was always a target of 120. And for your building, as a former middle school principal, I remember going, I am not getting here. I don't know how to get there. It is very challenging. I love that the target score is now going to be a variable. And it's going to probably hover around the 111 as the part where you'll get to those higher levels of achievement, those 5 stars, because they're going to take an average of the top achievement scores and build a target number. It will vary from year to year based on where the top tier schools, but we will see more people in the state of Ohio actually achieving high levels of success, which is indicative of what our kids are actually doing. Gap closing is also there, kind of the rating must be cumulative, and a district or building must receive a proportional amount of credit for how close it was to meeting its target, which I like that part and that component as well. And the component would also include the gifted indicator and chronic absenteeism. So keep working to track your students who are absent. There will be an overall report card grade, but it is not going to be in this first year, giving time for adjustments. The Senate did amend that substitute bill to include a study of the results in the new report card to be conducted following the 23-24 school year. So as you already know, there's no 2021 school year report card, and these provisions will apply with this next one that kind of comes up, and all of this becomes effective on September 30th. As I mentioned, graduation plans, future legislation is most likely going to impact those. The current upcoming senior class does need to complete can complete one of the original 3 options or the new law. And then those 2023 and beyond have to meet the requirements of that new law. That's that competency-based piece that you've been hearing me say. House Bill 244 is the vaccine prohibition. I want to make sure that you guys know that this bill becomes effective on October 11th. The original purpose was to help those military families who might want to participate in technology-based educational opportunities to minimize those disruptions, and then permitted school districts to have school-age children of active duty uniformed service members who were relocating to Ohio and are not district residents to apply for enrollment in a district with the same manner and the same time as resident students. But what was interesting about all of this is that the bill was, of course, amended late in the process to prohibit public schools and state institutions of higher education from requiring an individual to receive a vaccination for which the USDA has not granted full approval, and discriminating against an individual who has not received a vaccine that hasn't received that full approval, including requiring an individual to engage in or refrain from engaging in activities or precautions that differ from the activities or precautions of an individual who has received the vaccine. So as you are going into this next school year, please be in conversation with your health departments, which you all are, and make sure that you are following the recommendations of your Board of Education and Superintendent. Note that this bill does become effective on October 11th. School safety bill. This is going to affect your school district upcoming. Buildings with grades 6 through 12 have to organize threat assessment teams within 2 years of the bill's effective date, which was the December of 2020. I'm sorry. They have to include teams of school administrators, mental health professionals, school resource officers, and other personnel. The team has to be trained every 3 years as a state with a state approved program, and they must offer at least one training program that the state's going to offer you guys at least one training program that's free to districts. You need to develop a model threat. They will be developing a model threat assessment plan for use by districts. It's permissive, it doesn't mean you have to. And the one thing that you do have to be aware of is you've got to have a threat assessment team, and you've got to participate in the Safer Ohio tip line or another reporting program for purposes of anonymous reporting or perceived threats. OASSA has every year an annual safety conference, which is in November of this upcoming year. We have folks from ODPS coming and presenting on this specific bill and providing some guidance to our attendees. So if you want to mark your calendars for that and send a group of people or at least a member of your administrative team to our safety conference, hopefully this will be fleshed out a little bit more and you guys can get some best practices for how to create those threat assessment teams. If you have sports in your building, know that religious apparel sports, Senate Bill 181 was passed and referred back to the House. This is still proposed legislation, so be aware that what this does is prohibits the adoption of bylaws or rules that create an obstruction to wearing religious apparel. So if you wanted to have a cross on your uniform or something else, this is to kind of deal with that. It would also have some implications for when someone violates that prohibition against creating those obstructions. You could have civil action for damages, injunctive relief, or other appropriate relief. So kind of just be watching for this one. Again, this is a proposed legislation, has not been passed, but it's something to be at least watchful of if it's something of interest to you. House Bill 151, this is still pending legislation, but interesting to all of you who have been working with teachers in the Ohio residency program. They want to change it again to replace the 2-year Ohio teacher residency program with a 2-year local new teacher mentorship program. It eliminates the measure of progression and the requirement that the teacher take a performance-based assessment. So that resident educator RESA piece requires each mentorship program to offer opportunities to observe veteran educators, to discuss instructional practices, and to introduce to the teaching profession and an introduction to the teaching profession in school district or school. So you are probably doing that already, just by nature of being quality educators, doing the best for your brand new teachers. But this would change all of that resident educator program. So I definitely think it's important for you to get involved. Like I said, it is still pending in the House, but it's into its 3rd hearing. So if you have some thoughts, please reach out to your legislators in your area and let them know your thoughts on this program. If you are an administrator or you are a teacher, be aware of the evaluation timelines that are required by law. The deadline for a school district to notify a teacher that the person's contract will not be renewed for the following school year is June 1. It does require a minimum of 3 classroom observations instead of the 2 as a part of the evaluation process for non-tenured teachers who are under consideration for contract non-renewal. But be aware that this is a really interesting time. And outside of a serious terminable offense, it's going to be very difficult to fight teachers in removing them, given the fact that a lot of their classroom is in turmoil. I do want to make sure that I talk about suspension because it's the thing that I get the most questions about outside of transgender questions this year. It is about suspension. So if you are an administrator, know that there is only one type of suspension, and that is the traditional out-of-school suspension. There's no such thing as an athletic suspension. There's no such thing as a bus suspension. There's no such thing as in-school suspension or extracurricular suspension. If you have documentation that says that, make sure that you look to eliminate that word suspension, because if you use the word suspension, then you are required to follow the due process laws. Instead, I would offer several suggestions. In-school assignment, denial of athletic privileges, denial of participation privileges, loss of bus riding privileges. Without the word suspension in there, due process is not required. But we do fear that if we have folks that have athletic suspensions in place, we anticipate litigation that's going to ask you to make up that time loss because you are required to give that to folks during a suspension. So if they've been out for 3 games, how do you make that up to a student? It's pretty hard to do and virtually impossible. I'm going to throw out a couple of recent things that have gone through the court and have been ruled upon. And if you've been with us at all in the past, you've probably already heard about this one, but this is a case out of Washington in 2019 where an administrator saw drug paraphernalia as they were searching the student's property. They were walking outside in the parking lot, saw a bong in a student's car, which was on school property. It prompted a search of the car, then the backpack and the cell phone, and the parents filed suit, so it was an unreasonable search. Unfortunately for the family, the courts upheld the administrator and said that this was in fact a justifiable search, and did uphold the school district there. Another is we're going to talk about 2 different off-campus speeches. In Missouri of 2020, a student who engaged in off-campus speech on social media that targeted a fellow student was not protected speech. So the Missouri school decision to impose discipline for a violation of their cyberbullying policy was not a violation of the student's First Amendment rights. It was within the rights of the school district to say, you are not going to cyberbully this child in the way that you had. It was repeated, it was pervasive, it was awful. And so the courts upheld that this cyberbullying policy was violated, and the school district had every right to discipline them. But in late April, the U.S. Supreme Court heard another argument on First Amendment free speech, and this was the cheerleader in Pennsylvania that many of you may have heard about. She was disciplined for her online behavior when she criticized the school and the athletic programs. She used some colorful F words about the school, about cheerleading, about the uniform, all of that good stuff. And the United States Supreme Court actually picked this suit up and said that the district actually violated the First Amendment rights by punishing her for her vulgar social media message that she sent while she wasn't on school grounds. The big distinction here is that while public schools can have a special interest in regulating some off-campus student speech, the justifications here, just because she used vulgar language and she used the F word, does not necessarily raise to that same level as of cyberbullying. And so the courts were very deliberate in separating the two. That cyberbullying case that I just described to you is still what you would use potentially to justify your discipline of a student who is, violating your cyberbullying. But what the Supreme Court outlined for us is that it is separate. You cannot just blanket discipline all off-campus speech, and I don't think any of us want to be in the business of policing all of that off-campus speech. But what the Supreme Court said is that we have to make some distinctions between the two. That cyberbullying, yep, you can discipline for it, but just vulgar language is probably not going to be the right move for you. This was talked about in our OASSA newsletter that just came out in August. If you remember, please check out what our attorney wrote up for that. And if you have more questions, obviously reach out to us. Another one I want to bring to your attention is the courts dismissed a claim made by a teacher that discipline imposed by administration due to the teacher's refusal to address transgender students by their preferred names and pronouns did not violate the teacher's First Amendment rights. So this teacher in South Dakota said, I am not going to call this child by their preferred name and by their preferred pronouns because it violates my freedom of speech. And the school district disciplined the teacher for that. And the court said, no, you have no rights to that. This child is allowed to be called by those things. And then we talk about this a lot in our office because we find more and more people are faced with medical marijuana questions. Just know that marijuana is still prohibited by federal law, and you have policies probably in your handbooks stating that. And define what controlled substance is like. And so if you receive federal funding, which I'm going to guess on the screen, most of you do, you are subject to those federal laws and regulations. So make sure that you understand that even though there's some qualifying conditions in Ohio, they do not carry over into the schoolhouse. So hemp is not marijuana legally. In order for CBD oil to be considered as hemp, it has to have a THC concentration of not more than 0.3%. But I'm going to tell you, my last year, well, in my last month as an administrator, I had to address a student who was bringing in CBD oil. And if you look at those, you'll note very clearly they are not regulated by the FDA. And so I cannot tell you how much was actually in that. So we put a blanket ban on all CBD products in the building. You shouldn't be storing them. You shouldn't be administering them. And if you are asked by families, our recommendation is that you do not allow them, including in IEP 504 and health plans for students, because you cannot regulate that CBD product and know whether or not it meets that legal requirement. Additionally, many of you are faced with this, especially in middle school. I had a middle school call me this past week and said, man, I don't know what to do about all of the vape concentrated products that I'm receiving, these vapor devices, as well as what's in their pods. And so make sure to have the conversation in your district. You may want to consider adding all Juuls, e-cigarettes, vapes as part of drug and drug paraphernalia, because they can include, and oftentimes are manipulated to include, THC in those pods. Some schools are going to those on-site kits of THC, but I would just be concerned when I attempted to do this in the past and pulling those apart. There's often oil sort of floating on the outside, especially if they've been tampered with, and you can get a transdermal high. So make sure you get the gloves that your police officers can often provide for you, or you can get relatively easy on Amazon. There's testing kits for that, but make sure that you've got gloves on the entire time when you're handling any of them, because you do not know what's in them. And we have a member of our board for OASSA who had to be taken to the hospital because he encountered a transdermal issue after addressing an incident in his building. The last question that we often get asked is, oh my goodness, I've got this angry parent with me, whether I'm a teacher, whether I'm an administrator, and I'm being referred, they told me I'm being referred to the Office of Professional Conduct. And I'd like to calm everybody's fears. And this chart is meant to do that. The number of referrals that the office that ODE received in the Office of Professional Conduct in 2010 was 8,252. In 2020, it got close to doubling, right? The number of investigations launched in 2020 was 1,000. So look at the difference. The percentage is only 6.9% of those that were brought to the Office of Professional Conduct were actually investigated. And of those that resulted in disciplinary action, there were only 399. And most of the time, those referrals are conduct unbecoming. They make up a bunch of the referrals. But I'm going to tell you what, there are 12. Count them, 12 ODE attorneys. So I want you to do the math. That means each attorney is handling over 1,200 cases. So the ones that are showing up and actually getting acted upon are the showstoppers, right? So you can be referred to the Office of Professional Conduct for absolutely anything. I would just encourage your members of OMLA to take a deep breath. And especially if they know they've done nothing wrong, they have not acted in a way that prevents them from being successful with students. Chances of this going on and becoming a actual disciplinary action are slim, but moreover, it's going to take a long time. I know that members get frustrated when they've been turned over, they receive their letter from ODE, and then it takes forever to get any kind of resolution. And sometimes it's years, truly it's years. They've moved on from the position sometimes. Just know that ultimately, everything that's in your ODE safe account, your core account, that's where they're going to communicate with you. So if you have your home address, everything's going to come through a letter to that address. And it might take some time in order for it to actually reach you. So with that, I'm going to tell you good luck. We are all counting on you. This is an important year. If you need anything, whether you need to initiate or renew your membership, please make sure that you reach out to Tim and I. Here's our contact information. I'm going to leave that up for you for just a few more moments. I will offer to you that if you are a new administrator or you know someone in your district who's a new administrator in their first or second year, We are currently running an opportunity for them to go into our Beginning Administrators Academy. And right now, with a grant from ODE and a joint effort with OASSA, we have some free spots called AMP. It's the Administrator Mentoring Program. There's a lot of things that they are able to receive because of that. And they are able to get a mentor assigned to them in their first 2 years, as well as go through multiple sessions for beginning administrators, and they get their membership dues for OASSA or OAESA paid for a year. And so I would just encourage you, if you're one of those folks or know someone who has, the deadline for registering for a hotel room for September is this Friday. So we definitely want to get in touch with them quickly and get them registered. And I'm standing at the ready to help you out with all that. With that, I'd like to say thank you for having me today. Like I said, I will send the PowerPoint on to you so you have access to those slides, and would be more than happy to answer any of those questions for you after the fact. But thank you again, OMLA folks, for allowing OASSA to be in partnership with you and to share a little bit today. So thanks, Andy. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you again for all that information. Guys, I can't reiterate enough the value that the OASSA has brought to some people that I know in our industry. We put into the link, again, the OMLA conference link, but we also put in the OASSA conferences. Big one to hit, in my opinion, is they have their fall conference October 4th and 5th, which is great. It's a really great conference, but as an administrator, the Student Discipline Conference on September 21st is something that's valuable and that I attend every year, and that I learn something new every year for. And again, that's a built-in thing to protect us. So if you don't go to that, or you haven't gone to that in the past, that Student Discipline Conference, but then also the fall conference coming up in October is really, really very good, in addition to the other programming that the OASSA offers. On behalf of Ohio Middle Level Association, we really want to thank you guys for joining us. We know that you're incredibly busy, that you have a lot going on, but again, we find that these legal updates are incredibly important to keeping us in the loop and up to date on what's going on in the world as we manage our buildings and manage classrooms. Do not forget that we do have our once a year conference, the 2021 OMLA conference. It is back at the Hilton in Easton in Columbus, October 28th and 29th. The link to register for that is in the chat as well. But we really appreciate you. If you have any questions about membership, again, I put my contact information. I am also a member of the board for the OASSA, so I can answer any questions that you may have, or if I can't answer them, I'll find the answers. But for OMLA or OASSA, and we hope that you enjoyed this, that it was informational, and we hope that you join us again. As Rob said earlier, we're really trying to do almost once a month this school year, some sort of digital professional development to kind of meet the needs of our membership. So we appreciate you guys, and I will actually kick it to Rob Gonda, our Vice President of the Ohio Middle Level Association. And thanks again for joining us.